There's a very specific kind of walk people do when they need their job too much. It's hard to see from the outside, but you can feel it when you're the one doing it. You walk into work a little tighter, a little quieter, a little more careful than you want to be. You laugh at jokes that aren't funny. You agree to things you don't really want to do. You open emails with a small amount of dread already sitting in your chest. And when your manager says, "Can I talk to you for a second?" your nervous system reacts before your brain even catches up. A lot of people think that feeling comes from having a hard job, a difficult boss, or a stressful work culture. Sometimes it does. But a lot of the time, it comes from something deeper and more private. It comes from not having enough money between you and a bad outcome. Because when your savings are weak, work stops being just work. It becomes survival. It becomes rent. It becomes groceries. It becomes your car payment, your credit card bill, your health insurance, your internet, your kids' school expense, your check engine light, and every other fragile part of adult life stacked on top of one paycheck. And once that happens, you don't walk into work like a person making choices. You walk into work like a person protecting oxygen. That's the hidden truth people don't talk about enough. Savings do not just change your bank account. They change your posture. They change your tone. They change your patience. They change what you tolerate. They change how desperate you feel. They change how clearly you can think in rooms that affect your future. That's why savings change the way you walk into work. Not because money magically makes you confident. Not because having a bigger number in your account turns you into a different person overnight. But because even a modest amount of savings can remove a level of fear that most middle-class Americans have quietly normalized. And fear changes behavior. Especially money fear. If this kind of money psychology content helps you see your life differently, subscribe. Because a lot of people are not bad with money. They're just living inside pressures nobody ever taught them how to name. Think about how many working adults are living only one disruption away from panic. One car repair, one medical bill, one rent increase, one slow month, one child-related expense, one unexpected flight, one cracked phone screen, one appliance dying, one missed shift, one bad week. When you live that close to the edge, your brain starts organizing your entire life around avoiding loss. That does something to you. It makes you more emotionally dependent on your paycheck than you realize. And when your paycheck feels fragile, your job starts to feel emotionally dangerous. Even if nobody says anything, even if your boss is not terrible, even if your company looks stable from the outside, because deep down, you know something your body never forgets. You cannot afford for this to go wrong. That sentence alone changes how a person behaves. It changes how they speak in meetings. It changes whether they challenge bad ideas. It changes whether they negotiate salary. It changes whether they ask for flexibility. It changes whether they leave a toxic role. It changes whether they take a smarter opportunity somewhere else. It even changes how much of themselves they bring into the room. Because people are not just reacting to work. They are reacting to what work protects them from. And when work is the only thing standing between you and financial chaos, your relationship with work becomes psychological before it becomes professional. That's where savings start to matter in a way most finance advice misses. Most people hear build savings and think of responsibility. Discipline, delayed gratification, maybe even sacrifice. But the deeper function of savings is not just financial. It's psychological distance. Distance between you and panic. Distance between you and humiliation. Distance between you and forced compliance. Distance between you and bad decisions made under pressure. That distance changes the way you move through your life, including the way you walk into work. You've probably seen both versions of the same person before. Version 1 walks in already, bracing. They check their phone before they even reach the elevator. They're thinking about the payment due tomorrow. They're replaying yesterday's awkward conversation with their boss. They're hoping nothing goes wrong this week because there's no room for anything to go wrong. Their job is not just their income, it is their emotional life support. Version 2 might have the same job title, the same commute, maybe even the same salary. But they have a cushion. Maybe not enough to retire. Maybe not enough to disappear for a year, but enough to know that one bad meeting will not destroy their life. Enough to know that if things get ugly, they have time. Enough to know they can absorb a surprise without instantly unraveling. That person walks differently, not because they're arrogant, because they're not cornered. And that difference matters more than people think. When your mind is cornered, it shrinks. You become short-term, reactive, overly agreeable. You start managing immediate discomfort instead of long-term outcomes. You avoid conflict even when conflict is necessary. You stay quiet when you should negotiate. You stay loyal to situations that are draining you because change feels too expensive. That's what scarcity does. Not just poverty-level scarcity, everyday middle-class scarcity too, the kind where you technically have an income, technically pay your bills, technically look functional from the outside, but internally you know the whole system is tighter than it should be. The kind where one disruption creates a chain reaction. The kind where every month gets reset back to zero emotionally, even if not literally. That kind of scarcity creates decision fatigue. And decision fatigue is expensive. When your brain is constantly trying to hold together too many open loops, it burns energy fast. You are thinking about your grocery total, your auto payment, your student loan, your rent renewal, your subscriptions, your upcoming travel for a family event, your rising insurance premium, the weird noise your car is making, the fact that your boss has been acting different, the fact that your emergency fund is barely an emergency fund, and the fact that you still need to function like a calm professional at 9 a.m. People underestimate how exhausting that is, and exhausted people do not make their best decisions. They make faster decisions, safer decisions, smaller decisions. They keep the peace. They take the overtime. They delay the conversation. They don't apply for the better role. They don't ask for the raise. They don't push back on unreasonable demands. They don't leave when they should. Not because they're weak, because the math underneath their life is making courage feel unaffordable. That's why savings matter. Savings reduce the cost of courage. That might be one of the most important things money can do. Because once you have a cushion, your brain starts behaving differently. It starts seeing options where it used to see threats. It starts tolerating uncertainty better. It starts thinking in months instead of moments. It starts separating inconvenience from catastrophe. And that changes your energy at work in ways that are hard to fake. Let's make it practical. Imagine two people both hate their jobs. The first person has $200 left after bills, most months, and a nearly maxed-out credit card. Their tires are worn. Their rent just went up. Their manager keeps adding work without more pay. They know they should probably leave, but the idea of a gap between jobs feels terrifying. So they stay, they shrink, they cope. They tell themselves they'll deal with it later. The second person also hates their job, but they have a real emergency fund. Maybe 3 months, maybe even just $6,000 or $7,000. Not enough to feel rich, but enough to feel less trapped. When their manager becomes unreasonable, they feel the stress, but they also feel something else. Space. Space to think before reacting. Space to say no carefully. Space to job search without desperation leaking through every interview. Space to negotiate instead of pleading. Space to leave if the situation crosses a line. That space is power. Quiet power. Invisible power. The kind that does not show up in flashy lifestyle content, but changes real lives. And the strange thing is, the person with savings may not even look richer. They may drive an older car. They may live in a less impressive apartment. They may skip certain upgrades other people assume are signs of success. But when they walk into work, they often carry something the visibly successful person does not. Less fear. That matters. Because fear has a body language. Fear rushes. Fear apologizes too much. Fear over-explains. Fear says yes too quickly. Fear tolerates disrespect. Fear checks tone before truth. Fear makes you feel grateful for things you should be questioning. A lot of middle-class financial life is built around reducing visible discomfort while increasing invisible fear. That's the trap. People will finance the newer SUV because it feels like adulthood. They'll move into the more expensive apartment because it feels like progress. They'll keep upgrading the small comforts that signal they're doing well. They'll let monthly payments spread across their life like quiet handcuffs. And then, they'll wonder why they make decent money but still feel nervous all the time, because their lifestyle got better, but their margin got thinner. And thin margin changes personality. When everything is spoken for before the month even starts, you don't feel free. You feel managed. You feel like your income belongs to decisions you already made. Your future gets pre-spent. Your flexibility disappears. Your standards at work start dropping because you need continuity more than you need dignity. This is why a person making $80,000 with no cushion can feel more trapped than a person making $65,000 with savings and low fixed expenses. Income matters, yes, but optionality matters too, and optionality is where savings become life-changing. A lot of people think financial freedom starts at some dramatic number. 50,000, 100,000, a million. But in normal middle-class life, freedom often begins much earlier than that. Sometimes freedom begins at $1,000 because a car repair no longer becomes a crisis. Sometimes it begins at $5,000 because a job problem no longer feels instantly life-threatening. Sometimes it begins at $10,000 because you can finally imagine making decisions without the clock screaming in your ear. The number matters, less than the shift. The shift is from immediate dependency to partial independence. From I have to tolerate this to I have some room. From I can't afford to think long-term to I can finally think clearly. From my job controls my emotional state to my job is important, but it doesn't own me. That is a major identity change, and identity changes behavior faster than advice does. That's why people with savings often seem calmer at work, even if they are not naturally calmer people. They're not calm because they mastered productivity hacks. They're calm because the consequences of friction are lower. They can absorb stress without instantly turning it into panic. They can hear criticism without feeling existentially threatened. They can notice politics without feeling swallowed by them. Their nervous system is getting a different message. Not, everything depends on this moment, but I can survive this moment. That message changes everything. It changes. Negotiation. A person with no savings often negotiates like someone asking to be spared. They may never say those words, but the energy is there. They know they need the answer to be yes. Their bills are in the room with them. Their minimum payments are in the room with them. Their shrinking checking account is in the room with them. A person with savings still cares deeply. They still want the raise, the role, the opportunity. But they're less likely to collapse into neediness because they are not negotiating with a gun to their head. That difference shows. It changes job interviews, too. Desperate candidates often overperform in the wrong ways. They talk too much. They signal urgency. They tolerate red flags because they need relief. But the candidate with some financial breathing room can ask better questions. They can pause. They can sense mismatch. They can walk away from bad environments before getting trapped inside them. That's what savings really buy. Better decisions. Not because you become smarter, because you become less scared. And fear distorts judgment all the time. It tells you a bad job is safer than a risky opportunity. It tells you a high payment is manageable because you want the relief of buying now. It tells you a raise solved your problem when all it really did was upgrade your baseline. It tells you that visible success is worth more than invisible peace. But savings create friction against those lies. They slow you down enough to think. That's why even the simple math of savings has deeper consequences than people realize. Let's say someone saves $500 a month. In pure financial terms, yes, that becomes $6,000 a year. That matters. But the real change is not only in the total. The real change is that every month they are buying a little more. Decision-making power, a little more patience, a little more refusal capacity, a little more room to not react from panic. That is where money starts becoming psychological leverage. And this is also why people who never build savings often stay stuck in repeating patterns, even when their income rises. Because without margin, every improvement gets absorbed by lifestyle, convenience, and obligation. The raise disappears. The calendar gets more expensive. The subscriptions multiply. The car gets nicer. The apartment gets better. The food delivery becomes normal. The standard of living rises just enough to keep discomfort away, but not enough to create real freedom. So externally, life looks upgraded. Internally, work still feels heavy, because the walk into work is not determined by your salary alone. It is determined by how replaceable your paycheck feels. That's the question underneath all of this. If this job disappeared, would you have time to think? Would you have room to choose? Would you be forced to take anything immediately? Would you become smaller overnight? The more terrifying your answer is, the more your job owns your nervous system, and the more your savings grow, the less true that becomes. This does not mean everyone with savings becomes fearless. Life is still life. Work is still work. Bosses can still be difficult. Layoffs still happen. Unexpected costs still show up. Money does not remove all anxiety, but it changes the proportion. It turns total dependence into partial independence. It turns panic into inconvenience. It turns silence into choice. It turns compliance into consideration. And that is enough to change the way a person enters a building on Monday morning. That's why this conversation is bigger than save more money. This is about reclaiming parts of your personality that financial pressure has been renting from you. Your honesty, your patience, your standards, your confidence, your ability to think beyond the next emergency, your ability to imagine a different life and actually move toward it. That's what people mean when they talk about money buying freedom. Not yachts, not fantasy, not some over-the-top rich life. They mean this: the ability to go to work without feeling spiritually cornered. The ability to hear bad news without instantly panicking. The ability to say, I need to think about that. The ability to leave what is harming you. The ability to choose from a position that still includes self-respect. That kind of freedom starts smaller than people think. It might start with the first 1,000, then the first 5,000, then the first month of expenses, then a few more months. Then enough cushion that you stop seeing every work problem as a life threat. And somewhere in that process, something subtle happens. You stop walking into work like someone begging life not to go wrong. You start walking in like someone who still cares, still works hard, still needs income, but is no longer entirely owned by urgency. That is a different walk. And once you feel it, you realize savings were never just about money. They were about how much of yourself you get to keep.